the character's surroundings take on the character of the characters, or vice versa. So the fact that Raskolnikov's room is described at various times as a cabin on a ship or as a coffin, this type of enclosed space that is, shows his own mindset, his own sort of thoughts are actually sort of quite restricted in prison, whereas Sonia's room, for example, is of a very strange shape. It almost has 5 corners, suggesting that what she's been going through has somehow sort of distorted her, not just physically, but morally as well. So very often the physical locations of the characters will have a symbolic significance as well. It's got dusty, yellowy, peeling wallpaper. Yellow is one of the colours most often associated with St. Petersburg, particularly the water there, which is never recommended to be drunk even today, is of a sort of quite strong yellow colour. Of course, there's the sense of the yellow ticket, which is the symbol of prostitution linked with Sonia. Also, the word "the yellow house" is the term used for a mental hospital, a lunatic asylum. So, and also yellow is one of the imperial colours. It's also sometimes in Russian culture a colour associated with sort of Judaism. So there are lots of things involved when you see the colour yellow in the text, but it's the most common colour Dostoevsky uses to talk about St. Petersburg. Okay, so we get the sense that he says he's withdrawn from people completely, and yet, as Dostoevsky said in a famous letter about the text, this is one of the things that actually causes him to try to confess later on his desire to get back into human society, essentially. Okay, so let's see. I don't think there's too much we need to talk about. I think we've mentioned already in passing the various themes that emerge from this letter. What do you think is the importance of this letter that Raskolnikov receives from his mother at this time? Why is it significant? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think it necessarily acts as the impetus of the crime, but it definitely leads up to it, and that Raskolnikov feels bad about himself for not being able to provide for himself. And then he sees this figure, Mr. Illusion, comes in and is almost going to take that role of being the protector and the provider of his family. So he feels like he needs to prove himself as a man and maybe provide for himself by stealing.
Okay, very good, Jess. And what other things in the text perhaps sort of reinforce the interpretation you've just given? Are there any other sort of parallels to that situation?
I'm thinking maybe like in Sonia, how she has to provide for her family.
Yeah, so Marmeladov should be the father of the family. And what's happened there, of course, is that Katerina doesn't even say to her own daughter, go out and be a prostitute. She says to his daughter, it's not her daughter. So he hasn't been able, Marmeladov hasn't been able to act as the father of the family to do all of those things. So when you get this double, so that's a further reinforcing of this notion that somehow what Dunya would be doing, giving herself to Illusion, this guy who she certainly cannot respect and whose motives are pretty clear, just reinforces Raskolnikov's, as you say, some sense of guilt that he's not able to do what he's supposed to do there. Okay, good. And what else does this letter do? And it certainly makes this comparison between Dunya's sacrifice for Raskolnikov, and again, once again, reinforce this notion that sometimes in the text people will commit, evil against themselves, but there is nonetheless a difference between doing that and committing evil against someone else. So Raskolnikov sacrifices the pawnbroker and some Lizaveta. Sonia's accused of sacrificing herself. Dunya's about to sacrifice herself as well. But what else does this letter do? Just notice a pretty basic level of plot of introducing characters. And we learn more about Dunya, but who else gets introduced at this point? Well, Svidrigailov, yes. So we know about Dunya's problems with Svidrigailov. We know that he's a sort of rather mysterious seducer figure. We suspect this is not the end of the story, just the way he's described it. There's something mysterious about him. And of course, with the benefit of hindsight, we know that he's a very typical Dostoevsky figure. Also, this name, which is quite unusual, is linked with Lithuanian princes, but apparently there were quite a few literary types in the literary 1860s called Svidrigailov, and they were normally this sort of Gothic seducer figure, so we suspect that his name is indeed. Laurie, can you close the back door because it's a bit noisy with the thing? Oh, thanks. Okay, good. So So it's clear from this letter then that there's, that the sacrifice is not just the normal ones of sending money that they can't afford, and then that money Raskolnikov is in turn sort of used in different ways, but that Svidrigailov perhaps isn't quite so evil as we might be thinking, because on the one hand, yes, he did try to seduce Dunya, but then he did confess to that. So one of the big mysteries about Svidrigailov, I think, most sensible readers of the text would assume that he has indeed committed some absolutely awful crimes, but there's never any complete, firm evidence that he has done that. Maybe he's fantasized about committing certain crimes. Maybe these rumors, to grow around him, and of course, I don't want to spoil it, but certain things that happen in the text would probably suggest that he has done some pretty awful things. But there's always this, but maybe not. There's always this question mark hanging over him. And the fact that Svidrigailov can also do some pretty good deeds in the text, does this mean he's just beyond good and evil, that he's this completely amoral figure? In what ways is he paralleling Raskolnikov again? So as the text goes forward, we'll see greater similarities between Raskolnikov and Svidrigailov. This is the first stage where it's being mentioned. We can see also this rather strange desire to hurt and then be hurt oneself, humiliated, in the fact that Svidrigailov's wife, first of all, does her utmost to humiliate Dunya, going around telling everyone the bad thing she's done, and then when she finds out that she's in the wrong, instead of just doing what normal people would do, would be to apologize somewhat for it and try and smooth things over. No, she really wants to rub her own face in the humiliation. She goes around reading this letter to everyone in the town, and indeed everyone's like making copies of this letter, which is, Raskolnikov's mother said, I think this was going a bit too far. There's a bit excessive that people actually waited. It's my turn to make a copy of the letter that was sent. So it's all rather bizarre, and these extreme Dostoevsky characters, which are both fascinating, but sometimes for readers a bit stranger as well. Okay, so when we read between the lines here, we sort of find out the sort of person that sort of Luzhin is. What are some of the clues in Raskolnikov's mother's letter that Luzhin is indeed a pretty nasty piece of work? What's one of the things he does on a quite concrete level that he puts forward as being an act of great nobility, but in actual fact seems to be the opposite? Well, I think we have some various levels. On one level, the things that he sort of blurts out or lets out, that he wants to have someone who's going to be financially dependent upon him, because then that's going to allow him to perhaps have a greater emotional control over this person. But even at the basic level, when they're traveling to St. Petersburg, he said, "Oh, don't worry, I'll take on the expenses of your trunk. You'll have to pay for your own sort of fare, but I'll look after the luggage. I'll look after the baggage," which essentially is going to be a lot cheaper than offering to pay for their fare. And indeed, Raskolnikov says that he probably got that for free anyway. If he's going there wouldn't be any. It's not like an airline; they're not going to charge you excess baggage. They would have just put the trunk on anyway. But he's making a big deal. It's okay. I'll pay for your suitcases to be taken to St. Petersburg, rather than saying, no, I will pay for your travel there. So there are these little details about Luzhin, whose name, as you've probably seen in the notes, probably comes from the Russian word for a puddle. So again, one sense it looks back to that huge puddle, which is at the heart of Mirgorod, the great sort of site of the town. But nonetheless, it's intriguing that this name is used for him. Okay, anything else you think is important about the letter from Raskolnikov's mother? Anything you think we learn about her? I suppose this sense of complete obsession with him as the one hope of the family, that he is indeed a great man. Perhaps you can almost guess where he gets some of the ideas from, that they've had all of their hopes on him, and indeed he is a person of significance and talents, but nonetheless it's this cult almost of Raskolnikov within the family, so you can imagine why he has this rather narcissistic view of himself as he goes on. But at the same time, he's feeling very guilty about this, because he feels that he's let them down, and he also sort of sees their calculations that they would do anything in order to advance his career. And of course, they have some fantasies here as well. They already imagine him being a legal partner with Luzhin, which is probably never on the cards anyway. So they're just trying to convince themselves that what they're doing is right, and the more they do it, the more they realize that actually this is a not very nice scene at all, that Dunya is giving herself up for Raskolnikov, for Rodyon. And as he says on page 39, might this be her conscience secretly gnawing away at her for agreeing to sacrifice her daughter for her son? So the same sort of things that went on with the Marmeladov family. And just in case we haven't picked up on these parallels, on page 41, the text, Raskolnikov makes it quite clear, you're going to be Mr. Luzhin's lawful concubine, he says, and later on, even Sonitchka's fate is not to be sworn sure. So Sonitchka and Dunya, and a comparison that might seem to be offensive to Dunya is actually being brought in. What's the difference between this marriage as a type of legalized prostitution under the circumstances? And he even uses the word immaculate there, which is the phrase that Marmeladov had talked about, saying that Sonia has to be immaculate. And I'm not quite sure whether the translator is right in saying that this first and foremost refers to going and getting your medical certificate that you're sort of sexually healthy each week. I still think in the text it's probably more about making herself look nice with makeup and so on and clothes, but perhaps it does cover both of those things. Okay, so let's move on. Top of page 43, had to decide on all costs on something, anything, or else. So as was suggested, even if it's not the main motive, it certainly pushes him in the direction, okay, what options do I have? What about this plan I've been mulling over in my mind for the past couple of months? Wouldn't this actually not just be a general way of helping myself, helping mankind, but also helping the people who are most dear to me, my mother and my sister? Why wouldn't I do this thing that I've already decided to myself is actually probably the right thing to do in the circumstances? Murder the old woman, this dreadful old woman, and use her money for good purposes. Okay, obviously that's only one of the factors, and we'll talk about that later. It's intriguing then that this phrase comes in, do you really understand good so where it means to have nowhere left to go, for everyone must at least have somewhere he can go. At this point he seems to be interpreting this as meaning, okay, your option is to do this dreadful deed to murder the pawnbroker, but at another level, of course, it prefigures his whole journey throughout the text where he will need somewhere to go. That somewhere will be to God, will be to Sonia first and foremost, to go back into the human family and to find some faith ultimately. So what's the question then? So hand go up again. Okay, so then just to reinforce this notion of the percentages, the victims, the fact that there's always collateral damage in any sort of society, however awful that may seem to be. He sees this young girl who's obviously been abused by someone before, maybe a family member, maybe just someone seducing her and then raping her, and then this other person who seems to have the same designs upon her, whom he calls Svidrigailov. So don't be confused here. I mean, not that I thought you would be, but this is not actually Svidrigailov, but he's saying that this is a type, essentially, that this person is calling him Svidrigailov, both because this type exists in the literature with this name, but also because he does know there's this real guy called Svidrigailov. So it's appropriate for Raskolnikov to lump them all together as this potential seducer, this potential paedophile, rapist, whatever you want to call this particular individual here. And this theme of sort of child abuse at various levels was a major one in Dostoevsky's work. He once said that the greatest crime one could imagine would be the abuse or the rape of a young child, normally a young girl. I think in his work, and because he returns to this theme obsessively, probably very unfairly, some people started to think that there was an unhealthy element in his interest in this particular theme, and a rumor did start at one point that he had in fact on one occasion confessed to a friend, who then turned out not to be a friend, that he had himself on one occasion raped a young girl. Now, the evidence for this is extremely unreliable, and it's probably almost certainly apocryphal, but nonetheless that this story has somehow sort of stuck to Dostoevsky, so the fact that he always returns to this theme is at least of interest. And of course Nabokov, when he writes Lolita, although Nabokov claims to hate Dostoevsky and reckons he's one of the worst writers, grades him like sort of C- or something in his pantheon of Russian writers, nonetheless in many respects is a writer very dependent upon Dostoevsky, and the theme of child abuse, of rape, and all types of evil connected with that are of course at the heart of Lolita, and seem to have come directly from Dostoevsky as well as from other sources. Okay, so we see the two sides of Raskolnikov again here. On the one hand, wanting to do good, trying to make a small difference. There are probably hundreds of victims like that in Petersburg at this time, but when he sees this girl in front of him, he wants to do make a difference, essentially. But then at the end of it, he's thinking, well, okay, I'm about to murder someone. How can I be pretending that I'm this sort of great sort of moral force? Now, there isn't necessarily a contradiction here, according to his logic, because both of these would be sort of trying to do some greater good. But I think he realizes the complete sort of incongruency here at this moment. And he also feels, I suppose, pretty desperate that his sister is about to do what she's about to do. So he just thinks, well, what the hell? It doesn't make any difference. Just let it be another one of these percentages. There's always have to be some victims according to the math of his utilitarian sort of calculations. So it's not surprising that the policeman thinks this guy is a bit crazy, that he says one thing and then he says the other. Then Raskolnikov focuses again on his own interests, saying, what right do I have to give this money away? I have no money, my family has no money, and there I am sort of trying to be the do-gooder. Someone who's in the position to do that, okay, that's fine, but why would I be doing that? So we can see these completely contradictory forces, currents at work in Raskolnikov. Although he has sympathy for it, at the bottom of page 47, it's a poor girl, and then some madam will come, realize that she's already vulnerable, perhaps can't go home, or maybe home is where these dreadful crimes happened. There's this terrible line in Notes from Underground where the prostitute there is visiting the underground man, and he says to her, so, why did you go home? And she says, well, it was even worse there, essentially. So that may be one of the themes suggested. Okay, so another of the splits that we see in, sorry, at the top, page 48, so this same theme again. We always need to have some victims. This is the collateral damage, this is the percentage, this is the way life works. And the footnote is probably referring to the fact that another name for the pawnbroker would be the percentage woman, because she would take a certain percentage with every pledge. Okay, but then he sees it far more personal. It's all very well to think of this as in abstract terms of what if his sister Dunya is one of those who ends up on the streets, one of the victims as well. So that is also pushing him in the direction of saying, no, I do need to try and save Dunya. I do need to make a difference here. Some readers would suggest there's also, perhaps a rather disturbing closeness between Dunya and Raskolnikov within the text. I think that's going too far, but it's certainly, they are very close emotionally. Okay, so then he thinks about going to Razumihin, which obviously represents a completely different option to murdering the pawnbroker, because Razumihin means doing work, even though he's a poor student, taking translations. The thing that Tolstoy focused on, that Raskolnikov's big mistake was just not to try and do the little things correctly, essentially. So if he's going to go to Razumihin, that offers him a way out. He can get some money, then he can do a bit better and continue on his career, and so on and so forth. You don't have to murder someone in order to make some decent living and help your family, essentially. I mean, that seems to be the case for 99.99% of cases. So why is Raskolnikov so different? Why has he moved completely in this direction? Well, of course, it's more complex than that. It involves all of his Napoleonic ideas and so on. But we can still see him thinking on a more everyday level, okay, perhaps I could go to Razumihin, and then in order to not backtrack in his ideas, he says, yes, okay, I'll do that. I will try and act normally, but I'll do it after I've committed the deed. Well, of course, this begs the question, why would you want to go and sort of labor over a German translation for 3 rubles if he's just robbed a pawnbroker who apparently has got 5,000 rubles easily available at any time in her chest of drawers. But nonetheless, he says, no, I will go to Razumihin, I will try and act in a normal way, but I'll do that after the murder. Okay, so he says that on page 50, which is important. But then, of course, will that really happen? And he's not sure whether it will happen there. Okay, and then the dream, which obviously foreshadows the murder in many ways. So there are, I think, multiple possibilities of identification here. What would you say is most important in the dream scene, which is obviously a terrible and important part of the book, and obviously the book designer decided it was worth having these dreadful pictures on the back, and from the scene of the horse being beaten to death. Well, what do you think is going on here? What can we take out of this dream scene? Yeah?
Just like the old lady that he's about to kill, is the horse is old, basically on its last day, it's about to die anyway.
Yeah, and we're told that this horse basically doesn't pull its weight, does it? It's completely useless. It's just a burden on its own. It's economically completely useless, about to die anyway. So it's hard to feel that sorry for it if we think of however attached you might get to horses and so on, that they are being used for particular purposes, and this peasant's decided that it's his property. This phrase he keeps on repeating, so he has the right to do with it what he will. And as you say, if the horse is not pulling its weight, just like the old pawnbroker is thought to be sort of useless as far as society is concerned, yes, now you could argue she does have a role to play in society. Obviously, people wouldn't go to her for the money if she wasn't playing a role in the economics of the time. But yes, okay, good. So there is that parallel. Of course, the horse it's a female horse, so that's another thing. It's old, it's easily pathetic in some ways, and of course the violence used against the horse seems to be Raskolnikov's subconscious or his conscience protesting against what he's about to do, and he actually sort of says that quite explicitly when he wakes up. Is there anything else that can be said about the fiction of the horse? Yep.
I read it as his fear of what would happen to Julia, so kind of her husband taking her on as property and something to be like you said, like to be made queen, and then abusing her and saying it's my property.
Okay, yeah, so I do think all of these things come in, and the very fact that the father there is pretty impotent. The father is just standing alongside, and there's a young Raskolnikov, at least 7 years old, trying to make a difference, but the father who might be there to actually sort of help out. And it's intriguing that we don't actually get told much about Raskolnikov's father in the whole text. We're told a bit about the pension his mother gets, but the father, in fact, is a bit of absence within the text. Okay, good. So I think that broader scene of injustice and the fear of someone being manipulated, being abused, being ridden in all sorts of ways, and beaten is there, and it certainly could link with Dunya. Yeah, okay, good. Anything else? Well, it might be a bit of a stretch, but some people also think that this is possibly Raskolnikov seeing himself, what is best in himself being killed here, that one of the things he'll later on say about the murder of the old woman is that he killed himself as well. Does he sort of see that that this destruction is not just going to be the old woman, but it's going to be the destruction of everything he holds dear. The Raskolnikov who is able to go up to this horse and embrace it and be so kind to it is going to be no more if he does what happens within the dream. So it's like this double take. He's both the he's both the perpetrator of the evil deed, but in some ways also the victim as well, because once the old woman is dead, then what is most valuable in Raskolnikov is dead as well. And we get these very sort of moving and sort of terrifying images of how the peasants would mistreat the horses, the whip him particularly across the eyes. In Brothers Karamazov, the same phrase is used, say to beat them across their meek or mild eyes, as and there's a poem by Nekrasov as well, which has the same sort of image. So it's a really sort of terrifying scene. It's probably a stretch or a coincidence, but it's intriguing that when Sir Friedrich Nietzsche went mad in Turin, probably in 1900, the thing that's really was the final straw for him was a horse that had been beaten in the square there, and he went up to it and threw himself on the horse and embraced it. That was at the moment when Nietzsche went mad. So it's intriguing whether at some level there was a distant memory of this particular work, because Dostoevsky, as Nietzsche said, was probably the only person who sort of taught him anything. So there is that sort of curious link between these things going on here. Okay, so we see this with great sympathy. So this does suggest that there's this huge protest against evil and injustice going on here, that the young Raskolnikov in this dream is thinking, why do these sort of things go on in the world? It's so unfair, and you have to do something to prevent them. And yet, of course, in order to try and put that state of affairs right, the irony is, and the irony is a weak word here, is that he's about to do a great act of evil, and this question of whether, in fact, doing evil can ever lead to good things, or according to the utilitarian ethic, is, of course, the main theme being raised here. Okay, good. So it's a very sort of powerful and sort of terrifying passage, and of course, although it's again not a huge, the powers are not huge. Nonetheless, there are certain things in Anna Karenina, in the horse race there, that perhaps you can't avoid thinking back to this scene when you read them as well. Okay, so Raskolnikov, embraces the dead horse with its bloodied face, and of course, when he wakes up, thinking, "Can I imagine myself doing this?" On page 56, actually take an axe, will I be all soaked in blood? And of course, he says, "No. Luckily, I've suddenly realised that I don't want this. I was just sort of daring to do this, and in reality I wouldn't have, both because it's aesthetically disgusting and morally disgusting as well. So, okay, maybe on theory it would be fine, but in practice I'm not going to do this. And he starts using religious language, saying, so Lord, even then I'll not dare, and Lord, he prayed, show me my path. So this is the younger, more religious Raskolnikov speaking here, so he does seem to return in, back to his younger, more pious self. And he seems to be happy at this moment. He's got some freedom. He's escaped from this evil delusion, this spell that something's cast upon him, his own warped thoughts, the nature of the time, whatever it is, that's made him think about these things. And he's gazing at the sun, and the sun very often in Dostoevsky is a symbol of both sort of key moments of transformation, but also sometimes represents, nonetheless, the utopian ideals which Dostoevsky is ultimately from his work attacking, this notion that everyone wants the same thing, this idea of rational egoism, that therefore you can build society according to a rational, materialistic model, and Dostoevsky wants to assert that no, humankind is so varied that you can't have a one-size-fits-all model, essentially, for any of human social structure, social architecture. And then he talks about, so we get this climactic moment, and we think, okay, everything's changed for the better, and then he says, in retrospect, something strange happened at this moment, as if my fate were being decided. So we're told in chapter 57, why did he go home that way? The obvious thing to do after this moment, when he's changed his mind, apparently for good, he goes the long way home. He goes to the Haymarket. Why does he do that? He wonders why he did that. And why is it important, and why did he do it? So, first of all, why is it important that he went that way that evening? Just on a very basic level, what it says in the text. If he'd gone a different way home that night, what would he not have learned? Yeah, so exactly. So the fact that by doing this, he learns that Lizaveta at a very specific time will not be at home. And it's information, as he says, that to get that without any sort of risk would have been extremely difficult, but all of a sudden it's just fallen into my hands. I know that the old lady's going to be alone at this time tomorrow evening, so it seems to be the actual perfect piece of luck for him at that moment. And sorry if I seem sometimes be going over things which are pretty obvious in the text, but the reality is when you've got these big texts, I know you can be tempted to skip over things, and one of the things that came out of the essays were that perhaps not everyone was always reading that closely the text, so it is important to look at each of the details. So he learns this information about Lizaveta. So what are the different ways of understanding that information? But even before we get to that, what are the ways of understanding why he went for the Haymarket? Was it just completely coincidental, or is there something else going on here? How could you interpret it, and indeed, does it have any parallels with anything we've seen in any of the other texts thus far? Given that quite often writers will be referring back to other things, yeah?
Didn't he kind of relate to how fate kind of set it in place for him? Similar to how Pechorin keeps bringing out how he's cursed by fate to do something.
Also, I was thinking perhaps even more, though, of Herman. Remember when Herman says, how did he end up right next to the house, at the old Countess's house, when he was thinking, okay, I've got this of choice, am I going to do this? Am I going to try and find out the secret? No, my 3 true cards are hard work, blah, 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 blah. At that moment, he turns up outside the house of the Countess, and it says at that moment decided his fate. So it's just a bit of luck, it seems, a sort of chance moment. Same thing in Bronze Horseman, when Yevgeny turns up 6-9 months later at the point where the Bronze Horseman's stature is near to the point he'd been before, just before he went mad and so on. So the question is, why do you return, if not so much the scene of the crime, to the scene of something that's going to play a major role in your fate? And we could just say it is indeed a fate, or you could say it's coincidence. But it might also be the case, of course, I think we said this before, that at some level your unconscious is taking you there. That Raskolnikov is seeking one final opportunity to find out something about the Countess. He probably knows that Lizaveta hangs out at the Haymarket. That's the most likely explanation. I mean, we can also say that this is fate, or the devil, or God, and again, then it becomes interesting, who is actually arranging events in such a way that Raskolnikov seems to get so lucky in all of these moments, everything works out well for him, even though he doesn't expect it to, in order to make the murder take place. And then after what happens, who's in charge then? But if we're trying to say that there's another more rational explanation, it would probably be that A, Raskolnikov is aware that this is where Elizaveta hangs out, B, something within him saying, okay, I've persuaded myself I'm not going to do this, but part of me still is, well, maybe I'll just examine this idea one more time, essentially. So he's thinking about it at some unconscious level. And, you know, the fact that with so many, the Haymarket is quite a big place, there are lots of stores, does he just happen to walk past the one where Elizaveta happens to be at that moment? Now, we can say it's more likely that this is indeed fate, or this is providence, that God has somehow arranged this, or again, the devil, in order for things to work out the way they do in the text. Obviously, the author, Dostoevsky, is also arranging it in that way as well for his text. But there is, I think, this element of the psychology of Raskolnikov, that he is thinking, okay, if I go through the Haymarket, maybe I will find out something else that will help me. Now, that suggests that at some level he's planned all sorts of potential, outcomes or ways where he can find out information, to make his plan come about. And that's probably the case. He's probably gone through so many things in his mind up to this point, forgotten about them, but his unconscious has remembered it and think, okay, let's go back to the Haymarket one more time. Maybe we will get some bit of information that will change our mind again, because that's what happens in practice. So it does seem that it could be his unconscious there. The other thing, of course, is that it's not just a question of he wants to change his mind. It's also experimenting with sort of tempting fate, but almost taking the decision out of his own hands. He doesn't have the strong willpower to make that decision, so it's a weakness. So he's hardly the Superman. But if something should happen that pushes me back in another direction, then I'll go with it, essentially. That's what seems to be happening here. Because he already doesn't have much control over himself, it seems. When we keep on getting this phrase, mechanically, or in the Russian sort of machine like machinalna, he does things almost as if on autopilot. It's as if there's a self-hypnosis that's taken place, because he's become so obsessed with the idea of murdering the pawnbroker that things just sort of he'll flick a switch and things will sort of start happening almost despite himself. We see that with the actual murder of the pawnbroker, but it's in other places as well. Okay, so nothing astonishing about this encounter. So the very fact that it said that suggests that, okay, Elizaveta is always at the Haymarket, and at some level Raskolnikov knows that. Okay, so he finds out this exact information precisely 7 o'clock in the evening. Again, it's odd that the focus there is precisely 7 o'clock in the evening would be at home on her own, when we're told between 6 and 7. And one of the things that happens, of course, on the next day is that Raskolnikov sort of sleeps in. And what do you think might be the significance of that? Because first of all, he's been told between 6 and 7. Now he says at 7 already. He's like, making it more risky, isn't he? Okay, if you know someone's going to be going away at 6 and 7, then you're more likely to go at 6 rather than at 7. Well, if they finish their business early and come back more quickly, which of course is what happens. So why do you think Raskolnikov oversleeps the next day, apart from his general sort of feverishness? He doesn't just sort of oversleep, does he, the following day? What happens before he, or during his sleep? On page 63. Yeah.
Well, I'm thinking back, even to relating this to Queen of Spades, that with sometimes characters that are trying to do something that might lead to feeling guilty about it, they might purposely try to get caught in the act as a way of self-punishment.
Yeah, and certainly in the case of so whether he wants to get caught in the act or whether he wants to undermine even the act itself and not subdue it, another way of doing it. On the one hand, there's so much in him pushing himself toward, this is a great opportunity, I must use it. She's going to be alone at 6 o'clock. On the other hand, part of him is sort of saying, as with the dream of the horse, I don't want to do this. So he has another dream, doesn't he, just before he wakes up. It's a dream of the oasis, so it's quite like a positive dream of sort of like water, like the fountains of life and so on. It's a very refreshing dream for someone like Raskolnikov, who's in a stuffy, hot place where the water is undrinkable and yellow and horrible and dusty and dirty and so on. To have this image of the oasis, it's a very positive spiritual image he gets there. So it's a dream. It's almost as if his unconscious is wearing him out and say, please oversleep. We want you to oversleep, because if you wake up and it's already 8 o'clock in the evening, you'll think, damn, I've lost that chance. And then maybe the other side will kick in and you will decide not to go through it. So this struggle is going on at different levels within Raskolnikov here. The very fact that he thinks, and that fits in what you said, that at 7 o'clock in the evening, is he trying to get caught again by really pushing the envelope and risking it right at the last moment? Because of course that's what happens, because he does go late. If he'd gone half an hour earlier, then presumably he would have had half an hour longer to sort himself out before Lizaveta would have returned, so he could have escaped and everything would have happened in the way it did. Okay, then section 6, page 59, we get this rather matter-of-fact description, which is odd in the context of the horrors that are about to unfold. But later on, Raskolnikov learned what this was, and it was just about a business deal, blah, blah, blah. So, at this moment, of course, you might be thinking, oh, he learned this from Lizaveta, he learned this from her, or in some other situation. We don't know, of course, that Lizaveta is also going to be murdered in the forthcoming pages. Of course, we might suspect, we might think, okay, these things are not going to work out straightforwardly, they probably never do in murders, but nonetheless, I think it's still quite a surprise. Well, obviously, I've spoiled it for you on verification, but I think it's quite a surprise when you read it the first time that Lizaveta gets killed too. And sorry you haven't got that far, because now you know what happens. Okay, so the superstitions, again, are referred to. The fact that the pledges he's taken to the pawnbroker are the silver watch belonged to his father and the ring from his sister link, again, his desire to change his life, to make a difference and to commit the crime with his guilt before his family and his debt towards the family. So that's why. It could have been other possessions, but no, it's the father's gift, it's the sister's gift. That seems to be significant. Okay, so he talks about all these sort of coincidences that seem to happen, and of course there were two ways of looking at it. On the one hand is that just so many people were having these ideas at the time. It's not surprising he overheard this conversation in the bar about, first of all, about the old woman whom he'd just gone to visit, but also about the ends and means idea of let's murder someone like her because then it really makes sense. She can do so much good, and she's about to die anyway, and so on. What do you think is most significant about the both about the way the old woman is described on these pages, but also about the fact that these two, the officer and the student are having this conversation about exactly the things that Raskolnikov is thinking about at that time, too. What does it tell us about the nature of the actual idea? First of all, what does Raskolnikov think about his idea? How has Raskolnikov described his idea to us right at the beginning of the novel? They say, oh, I've got this idea, but everyone's got this idea, everyone's talking about it. I mean, he says it's a new word, a new act. He thinks that what he's doing is new and different and original. If he's a Superman, obviously he has to think of something which is not, a cliche, not the talking point of the time. And yet the fact that everyone seems to be talking about these things does seem to be significant. It already undermines his claims to be such a great thinker. I had this brilliant idea that if you do this and do this, then, I'm a Napoleon, essentially. And the fact is that everyone, whenever they get drunk, they start thinking about this. It seems to be a clever thing to talk about. In actual fact, it's so cliche. As Dostoevsky said in the letter, there's these half-baked ideas in the air, okay, that take in a distorted view of utilitarianism, the ideas coming from England and elsewhere, the notion that the ends justify the means, and particularly this type of very basic utilitarian calculation is being talked about. It's also true that there are literary sources of this in Balzac's The Pièce of Goriot, Old Man of Goriot, which was a work that Dostoevsky actually translated and is one of his favorite novels. There's a scene there where the character is Rastignac, and again he's referring to something which is present in works by Rousseau, asks his friend, who's a very poor medical student, so again quite similar to Raskolnikov there, that if you had this old mandarin of China, who, when he died, 1 million francs would then be available, which you could spend on your elegant mistress. Again, that's not something that Raskolnikov is thinking about particularly, but also provides a dowry for various loves of your life or help members of the family, all sorts of things like that. So again, put in a context which is to do with love affairs and family and so on. Would you speed up the death of this mandarin of China, essentially? Okay, and also Napoleon is sort of brought into the discussion, and I haven't got all of the words here, but The answer is friend to say, to act in this way, my dear fellow, you have to be Alexander the Great. And says, as for myself, I'm happy with the modest existence that I have. Human affections are satisfied as fully in the smallest circle as in the immense circumference. So again, sort of know your limitations. And he says Napoleon did not eat his dinner twice. So how much do you need, essentially? And Napoleon can't eat 2 dinners. So why do you want all of this money? Why do you want all of these things? Happiness, my dear fellow, is always located between the soles of our feet and our cranium. And whether it costs $1 million or 100 louis, blah blah blah, some other thing which I haven't got the full sort of phrase for. So essentially, it's an idea that has been described already in some French literature. People have talked about it at the time. It also has the links with utilitarian notions. So the very fact that Raskolnikov is not as original as he thinks at that moment does seem to be significant. So he's hardly the Superman, he's hardly a great thinker. Of course, looked at more broadly, there's always utilitarian calculations going on. The state, for example, will decide what medical bills are worth of paying, and when insurance coverage is so many millions or hundreds of millions or whatever. Decisions of war, and this is something that Raskolnikov will later on talk about. He says, well, it's okay when the leaders do these sort of things. Why is it bad for me to do it? There was a pretty terrifying statement that Madeleine Albright once made when she talked about the Iraq War and saying, well, yes, okay, these sort of sanctions are so terrible. We know that 500,000 children may die from these sort of sanctions, but it's a price worth paying, essentially. So that was a statement that she came out with, and all politicians do this sort of thing to a certain extent, and the notion that you have to make these calculations is something that is present. Now, the fact that Raskolnikov is thinking in these terms and gets brought low, I think is significant, but nonetheless, it's worth seeing that broader context, because right at the end, when Raskolnikov is still trying to assert that he is right in some ways, he does have some arguments on his side. Okay, so the actual fact that they're saying there's a difference between if you're willing to subdue it on page 62, that's one thing, but otherwise this is just a complete waste of time. Let's just get on with our billiard game and drinking our beer, essentially. Okay, so but Raskolnikov is still thinking, didn't those guys sound like a load of jerks, so I must be a jerk as well. He takes the opposite message out of saying, no, these are really interesting ideas. I've been thinking about that, and they haven't got the courage to do it. They don't see that this is a new word, but I will go there, essentially. But of course, then all the other factors then come into play: his own lack of money, his feelings of guilt about his family. But above all, it's also because he's superimposed upon this idea is his notion that he could be a Superman, an exceptional individual, because he's written this article, which will later on be discussed. Okay, so the mental illness and the physical illness in this feverish pre-crime state seem to fuse, and he goes back home. And once again, this dream, I think, is the final attempt of his conscience to say, no, don't do this. And that's why he thinks of this very beautiful scene of he drinks and drinks, but stream which flows and bubbles right there beside him. That's a really nice positive image, and then all of a sudden he sort of wakes up. So despite the fact he wants to sleep, the other part of his body that's listening out for the clock that tells him it's 6 o'clock, it's 5 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock, is also working. So this struggle is going on here. And when he wakes up, he sort of goes into actions and pretty quickly. Now, what would you say about the preparations that he made for the crime as described on page 64? The idea of the loop within his coat, where he can hang the axe, some other things. What sort of duality do we get here? What sort of contradictions do we get in this depiction of his preparations for the crime? Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting because he made a lot of preparations for carrying out the crime, and like you said, like the loop and all of that stuff.
And the pledge.
Yeah, for committing it, but he didn't really make any preparations for what he was going to do after, with the loop, where he was going to store it, how he was going to obtain any of the money. He kind of just acted after the fact. It was all focused on how he was going to kill them.
Okay, very good, yeah. And even with that, it's not as if he's made every single thing. You think, okay, if he's got this plan, okay, he does put the needle and thread ready, he has made the pledge, but the other thing about actually sort of sewing the loop into his coat, he hasn't done that. You think he was to do that before he would have everything ready. So most of the things are ready, but not everything is ready, even for the preparations. Then for what comes after, as you say, there's absolutely no preparation for that at all. Okay, good. The fact that the pledge is tied with string and a cross, I mean, that might seem a bit too obvious a symbol, but perhaps it is significant that the cross is there, suggesting a different way. Okay, so then he learns his well past 6. So for all of his sort of great sort of plans, all of the good luck, he's already undermining them by oversleeping at that moment. And I think, again, for building on what you said there, this clash between the more definitive his ideas were, the more hideous and absurd they immediately became in his own eyes, that he could never believe in the prospect of his plans being carried out, not once in all of this time. So on the one hand, it's also concrete in the plan, and on the other hand, you think, well, why would I really go to the next step about what happens afterwards? Because this is never going to happen, essentially. So there is that sort of struggle taking place. Of course, he's thought of getting the axe, but again, it still depends on luck. And it turns out that when he goes to try and get the axe, he can't get it because Nastia's in the kitchen. So all of a sudden, his sort of plans have fallen through. So that seems rather strange that it's all sort of, predicated on getting lucky at that moment with the axe. But then, of course, as so often in these next few minutes, fortune seems to smile upon him, because lo and behold, in the caretaker's place next door, there happens to be a second axe. So he picks it up. When he's going into the courtyard, a cart with hay on it goes past him at exactly the moment, so he's got this sort of cover as he walks into the courtyard. Incidentally, the fact it's a cart covered with hay does seem to be significant, not just linked with the Haymarket, but hay is normally, at least in certain cultures, a symbol of good luck, or when you see a hay cart go past, you're supposed to turn gold. If you get a ring on, you turn your ring, and so on. So that seems to be every fortune is smiling upon him. It's as if the world, as if the universe wants Raskolnikov to succeed. Otherwise, why would it produce the axe? But who's doing that? Is it chance? Is it the devil? Is it God? What's going on? How to understand all of that? Okay, so also sort of told that that he even felt that the test was only a test of the test, and he wasn't actually going to go through with it. It's the abstract idea which attracts him more than anything else. Okay, so let's be like Dostoevsky and leave it on that cliffhanging moment. Sorry, essays back. So we continue on.